Hello, everyone. Welcome to our September 1st Tuesday. My name is Daniel Senner, and I am the Community Conservation Coordinator for the Methow Conservancy. I am here today with Dr. Ellen Aikens, a quantitative or movement ecologist who is currently doing her postdoctorate at the Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior in Germany. I will be talking with Ellen today about her PhD research at the University of Wyoming on how migrating mule deer follow a green up of high nutritional vegetation from their winter range at lower elevations to their summer range at higher elevations. You can watch the second part of this first Tuesday, a video presentation of Ellen's PhD thesis, by clicking on the link below. So, Ellen, how is your new position in Germany going?
It's going good. It's of course a little bit stressful to move to a different country in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic, but I'm really happy to be in Germany, and it's so far been a very nice place to live and work. So I'm happy to be where I am right now.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. Well, thank you for joining us during your dinner time. And before we get too deep into science here, I just wanted to ask you, have you ever heard of the Methow Valley or maybe been here?
Unfortunately, I haven't been there, but who knows? Maybe I can come visit at some point when I'm back in the US.
We would like.
I looked at your Instagram page, and it looks like it's a super beautiful place. So I definitely like to visit at some point.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I found your work by chance as well. I'd come across a summary of your research in the magazine Scientific American, and I thought that it was super relevant to the Methow Valley and the conservation work that we do here at the Methow Conservancy. As I mentioned earlier, the Methow Valley has the largest migratory mule deer herd in Washington state, and they are a very important natural resource to this valley, and one that we'd really like to protect going into the future. So with that context, can you tell our membership a little bit about the green wave and how migrating ungulates like mule deer might surf that wave?
Yeah, sure. So the idea of the green wave and surfing the green wave was the focus of my PhD research. And one of the core ideas to understand about the green wave is that the best quality food for ungulates, so hoofed mammals like deer and elk, is this young, nutritious spring green up, because this stage of plant growth is high in protein, but low in fiber, so it's easy to digest, and it's basically the best quality food for deer and similar species. And that stage of plant growth only lasts for a short amount of time at any one point on the landscape. But when you think about how plants grow and how that manifests across the landscape, we know that plant growth is delayed along an elevational gradient. So as a result, there's this wave of spring green up that moves across elevational gradients and across the landscape. And so it makes sense for migrating deer that start at low elevation and move to higher elevation, for them to follow this wave of spring green up in order to lengthen the amount of time that they're exposed to this high quality and really the best quality food. So this phenomena of animals following the progression of green up as it moves along the elevational gradient is called surfing the green wave, and it's really thought to be an important driver of the foraging benefit of migration, and an important driver of when and at what pace animals move across the landscape.
Awesome. Very interesting. So what might make a good green wave surfer versus a bad green wave surfer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's a question that I had a lot of interest in. And it's something that I addressed in the first chapter of my PhD research. And I considered three different hypotheses about what could maybe make a good or a bad surfer. And the first one was this idea that maybe it's dependent on age. So maybe older, more experienced animals might surf the green wave better than younger, inexperienced animals. And we tested this idea and we didn't really find any relationship between age and green wave surfing. So that's not really what makes a good or a bad surfer. And then we thought maybe it's state dependent foraging behavior. And by that, I mean, if an animal is maybe in really bad nutritional conditions, so it's not doing very well, it's starving, maybe it will surf better than an animal that is in really good body condition. It has a lot of fat, so it can kind of, trade off between more vigilance behavior and foraging. And so we looked at the relationship between body condition and green wave surfing. And this is in a population of mule deer in Western Wyoming, in the Wyoming range. And again, we didn't find any support for that idea. And so finally, we thought maybe it has something to do with the way that the green wave itself moves across the landscape. And perhaps, animals that use different migration routes, the green wave might be easier to surf for along some routes than others. And so we kind of conceptualized this idea using the concept of the greenscape. And the greenscape characterizes the green wave using three different metrics. The first is duration, so how long green up lasts across the entire route. So the difference in green up at the beginning and the end of the route. So a route that has a long green up duration would maybe allow for better surfing than a route that has a really compressed, short amount of time where green up moves across the landscape. The next is the order of green up. So basically how sequential is green up along the migration route. And by sequential green up, I mean things at the beginning of the route green up first, and then things at the end of the route green up last. And there's this nice gradient that animals can follow. And then finally is the rate of green up, or how fast green up occurs at any single one point on the landscape, with the idea being that when green up is really rapid, there's a really small window for animals to access that. And at first we thought it would make it harder for animals to surf when green up is very rapid at a single point on the landscape. And that's the case, but green wave surfing is especially important in those types of landscapes, like in Wyoming, where green up is very fleeting. So I don't know, I can talk about that result a little bit later, but basically the main result of my first chapter of my PhD research was that we found really strong support for the greenscape hypothesis, in that routes with a long and sequential green up order were what really made the difference between a good and a bad surfer. And so what's kind of really useful about this result is that you can use the concept of the greenscape to basically prioritize the quality of different migration routes, and also then knowing how to quantify differences in the green wave across these different migration routes. You can then ask the question of how does the green wave change under different environmental conditions? And things of that nature.
Yeah, so how would something like drought affect the greenscape?
Yeah, great question. This is also something I looked at for my PhD research, and that was the second chapter of my PhD. And I looked at this in the same system of mule deer in Western Wyoming, and we were really interested in understanding if drought negatively impacted the greenscape of these routes that animals were migrating across, because we know that there's a strong link between drought and poor population performance in ungulates like mule deer, but the exact mechanism of how drought negatively impacts population performance is not totally clear. So we thought maybe it could be because drought is negatively impacting the greenscape and reducing the foraging benefit of migration. And so what we did was we looked at a 14-year time series of drought data and remotely sensed data on plant greenness across the landscape. And we found that in drought years, the green wave is actually compressed in time and it's less sequential. And as a result, animals still migrate and they still follow the green wave, but in doing so, they get much less of a foraging benefit. So it's a difference between maybe, say, migrating and getting this really high quality food for a couple months to maybe only getting that food resource for a couple of weeks in some extreme cases. So drought really does reduce the ability of animals to get a foraging benefit from migration.
Interesting. So is there any surfing during fall migration, or is it only a spring phenomena?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question that I didn't get a chance to address in my PhD research, but luckily someone else in my lab is looking into that.
Oh, very cool.
Her name is Anna Ortega, and maybe you can have her on when she publishes that research, but she's looking at, yeah, basically if animals are following kind of like a wave of residual greenness in their fall migration. So there's this idea that kind of like the green wave leads animals up to high elevation and maybe snow pushes them down, but they don't want to just go straight from high elevation to low elevation because generally like higher elevation areas are more productive and probably have more food. And so there's kind of this trade-off between getting stuck up high in deep snow and then going down low where there's less food, but it's a lot easier to move around. So she's looking at this idea of if animals are kind of getting pushed down by snow and kind of trying to maximize residual greenness as they make their fall migrations. So that's one idea, and I think that Anna is finding support for this. But maybe check in with her in the next 6 months and see if she has finalized results to share. But yeah, I think that there is some surfing that's happening in the fall as well.
That's super fascinating. And yeah, we'll definitely have to check in with her maybe next fall, next September, get her in person, or maybe the whole lab.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, there's lots of really fun migration research happening in Wyoming right now, and it's a really cool place to learn about ungulate migration and work on those topics. And it's a great group of people, and I, of course, miss them a lot, especially in COVID times, but yeah.
Cool. So even though peak wildfire season for the Methow Valley and Western Wyoming is in August, can you speculate at all on whether the increasing frequency of high-intensity wildfires will have an effect on the greenscape and how ungulates may use the greenscape?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit outside of my area of expertise, but I can certainly speculate. And I think depending on, the spatial distribution of these wildfire events, that can certainly influence things like the duration and order of green up. If there's a wildfire in the middle of the animal's migration route, like the previous year, that's certainly going to affect the phenology of plants or kind of like how plants grow through time. And it's the effect is going to be different with basically the age of the disturbance. And so, yeah, I can imagine it happening where wildfires could make green up more or less ordered, and it really just depends on kind of like the spatial distribution of this disturbance event. And I think it will also depend on the age of the disturbance as well. So it's, yeah, not like a definitive, yes, it will be good or bad, but it kind of really depends on a lot of factors. Yeah, but it's definitely something that would be really interesting to look into more and research more directly.
Cool. Now pretend that you work for a land trust like the Met Howe Conservancy, and you are tasked with prioritizing mule deer habitat for conservation. In light of your research and the future effects of climate change, are there any parts of the green wave that you would prioritize for protection?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, you can use the concept of the Greenscape to maybe prioritize really high quality migration routes over others. But another important thing to think about when it comes to green wave surfing is basically general connectivity across the landscape, because for animals to be able to surf well, it's all about timing and having flexibility in when and where they're moving. And so I think that if it was me trying to work on, prioritizing mule deer migration and conservation, I would focus on identifying barriers to movement and also trying to prevent new barriers to movement, especially in areas that are core migration corridors. So basically mapping those corridors and assessing the threats along those corridors when it comes to the ability of animals to freely move. And that could be projects as simple as fence modification, or projects that are as complicated as creating a wildlife over underpass for roads. So I think beyond just trying to say, this migration route is high quality now and this one's lower quality, I think just connectivity across the landscape is super important for highly mobile species like mule deer and other migratory species.
Very cool. And one final question here for you, Ellen. This one comes directly from our membership, who saw a picture of you and your dogs from your website in our weekly newsletter where we teased this first Tuesday. And they want to know, what are your dogs' names?
So the big black dog is my dog. His name is Duke, and he's a mix between a lab and a mastiff. And the other dog is my friend Sarah's dog, and his name is Kuba, and he is a St. Bernard and Burmese mountain dogs mix. So two big dogs that love the snow.
How is Duke acclimating to Germany?
So he's not here yet because I just moved here and I'm staying at a guest house that doesn't allow dogs. So he is still at my parents' house, but he's in really good hands with them. And yeah, I miss him a lot because there's so many cute dogs in Germany and they all make me miss my dog a lot. So I'm looking forward to being reunited with him when I find a good dog-friendly place to live.
Well, I hope that happens soon. And our readers also wanted to let you know that in mid-February, we have a race here in the Met Howe Valley. It's called the Doggy Dash, and it's a ski joring race, but you dress up in costume. And so you have been formally invited by the Met Howe Valley to come and join the Doggy Dash.
That sounds amazing. Fingers crossed I can come. That sounds really fun.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Ellen. It's been a pleasure, and you do really incredible, fascinating work. And I hope your postdoc goes well. Best of luck.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for watching and for your interest in migration and conservation of migratory species. And yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with everyone.